See Book 9. This is now Odysseus telling his tale, so this is pretty much all in retrospect, which is where the sort of actual action of the Odyssey begins. He praises the bard and the feast, but says that he has many woes. He tells them his name and origin, Odysseus, son of Laertes from Ithaca. Now is the story. So his men are sailing back from Troy, and they come across Ismarus. Ismarus is the land of the Cicones, and the Cicones were allies of the Trojans, so he feels like he should sack this city. So he does. And then he wants to leave, but his men refuse. This shows bad leadership, because he should be able to control his men as the leader. The surviving Cicones raise more Cicones from another island, who return to fight, and then this fighting happens from dawn to dusk the next day. So the Cicones at the moment, in the second battle, have more men and better trained soldiers. And so 6 men die from each ship, which is 72 men, as there are 12 ships. They sail on from Ismarus and salute each dead comrade 3 times. Zeus sends a storm, so they row to land and rest for 2 days and 2 nights. They sail on for 9 days until they reach the land of the Lotus Eaters. The Lotus Eaters, the lotus plant is essentially a narcotic. It's not a thing that it actually exists. But if you've seen Percy Jackson, that's what they eat when they're in the Las Vegas hotel gambling, and that's why no one leaves. Everyone's just there in this sort of perpetual high. So after eating and drinking, Odysseus sends 3 men to explore. These 3 men eat the lotus fruit and lose any wish to return, which is what this narcotic does. Odysseus finds the men and has to tie them up and drag them back to the ship, then tie them under the benches in order to stop them from returning to get this lotus plant. They sail out on to the land of the Cyclops, who is very uncivilized. He has no assemblies, no laws, no houses, and no harbours, etc. So already we think there must be some sort of barbaric creature there, because who would not have these civilized things? They harbour on a luxuriant island very close to the Cyclops' land. Odysseus says a god must have guided them in, because it was very sort of foggy when they landed, yet they didn't crash into anything. And there are loads of goats on this land. They fall asleep. They kill and eat goats in the morning. 9 goats were allotted to each of the 12 ships, but Odysseus gets 10 whole goats just to himself. This shows he's a valued leader, but obviously it's slightly unrealistic, because can one man eat 10 goats? Unlikely. For the whole day, they feast on meat and wine. This is a subtle reminder that the ships still have reserves of wine, as this will come in very important by the end of this book. The next day, Odysseus takes his own ship and personal crew to the land of the Cyclops to see who lives there, and then he tells the rest of his men to stay on the nice luxuriant island. Again, this is quite good leadership, because he is taking initiative. It's him going to search rather than any of his other men. They see a cave and large flocks of sheep and goats. He tells the rest of the crew to stay and guard the ship, and then takes his 12 best men to explore. He brings some unmixed wine with him, which is concentrated in parts 1 and you mix it in parts 1 to 20, so it's very, very strong. Essentially, this detail tells us that you need to dilute it quite a lot. They go to the cave, but its owner isn't home. They see baskets of cheese, milk, and separately penned goats even. This is very organised, and so it shows good ownership. The men want to steal the food and flee, but Odysseus wants to wait and receive Xenia. This is greedy, because he wants to get these Xenia gifts. He wants to get the thing. What he could do, even though it would be poor Xenia to wait to leave and steal, but you could do that, and it would make him return home quicker, which is supposedly his one true goal. Also, he doesn't take majority advice, which could be bad leadership. However, this was not a democratic time, so as he was king, perhaps that wasn't considered bad. That is again a debate between modern readers and things like that. But this sort of action fuels the theory that actually Odysseus could have returned home quite a lot earlier than he did, because he was sailing around trying to gain wealth, profiteering from Xenia. It's just one interpretation. It's not the interpretation that most of the people at the time of Homer would have thought, but it's one interpretation that's kind of more common now. They light a fire and help themselves to some cheese. Again, this is bad Xenia, because there are rules for both host and guest, and Odysseus is taking things before he's been offered. A giant Cyclops returns. A Cyclops, as you can see from the picture, a giant with one eye. The men are so scared that they retreat to the inner recess of the cave. The Cyclops closes the entrance with a boulder and then methodically milks his goats. He finally sees them and then is very angry and asks who they are. He doesn't offer any hospitality, any Xenia. Odysseus says that they are Achaeans from Troy. He's trying to show his Kleos and actually trying to show that to sort of show his war background, to demonstrate that actually he's a war hero. He can defend himself. In a sense, trying to scare the Cyclops, but obviously Cyclops is a giant and it doesn't really scare him at all. He then asks Xenia and reminds Polyphemus that Zeus is the god of guests. Polyphemus says that Cyclops don't care for Xenia or the gods because they are much stronger than any divinity, which is actually quite bad, because they shouldn't, they're actually, Cyclops are Poseidon's sons, so they are related to a divinity and they shouldn't be saying these things. They are still submissive, but this particular Cyclops, Polyphemus, is particularly blasphemous in a way. He then asks where Odysseus moored his ship, and Odysseus says that it was shipwrecked. So he's trying to see if there are any more men with which he can kill or attack. So Odysseus lies in response. Cunning Odysseus, traditional epithet. Polyphemus grabs a couple of men, dashes their heads on the floor and eats them, washing it down with unwatered milk. This is particularly uncivilized. This is literally, it's unpasteurized, it's just thick, and it's just demonstrating that the Cyclops is very uncivilized, particularly barbaric. Odysseus wants to stab him, but realizes that they would not be able to escape the cave due to the big rock in the doorway. They're all too weak to move it. The next day, the Cyclops milks his goats and then eats some more of the men. He goes out to tend to the flocks. Odysseus begins to scheme and takes Polyphemus's olive stick, cuts off a bit, sharpens the point, and hardens it in a fire. He then hides it under dung. The men cast lots for who will help Odysseus to stab Polyphemus. There are 5 men in total. He returns, milks his goats, and then eats 2 more men. Odysseus offers the Cyclops some wine, pretending this is part of a Xenia, and sort of almost trying to say, please don't hurt us, although he knows that the Cyclops won't really listen to that. So the Cyclops downs it, likes the taste of it, he's never had wine before, and then asks for more. So as we've just been told, this is very, very, very strong alcohol. It's essentially almost pure alcohol, so he gets drunk quite quickly. He asks for Odysseus' name so that he can give him a gift, and having someone's name would give him the power to curse him. Odysseus fills up the wine 3 more times, and then tells Polyphemus that his name is Nobody. Polyphemus says that his Xenia gift is to eat nobody last. He then collapses face upwards. This is a necessary detail for the next action, and vomits because he is incredibly drunk. And think about it, he's quite a lightweight because he's never had alcohol before. He doesn't really know what it would do to him, so you can't really blame him for getting drunk. The men heat the pole in the ashes of the fire. This is the one that they've sharpened beforehand, and drive it into Polyphemus' eye. He wakes up and shouts, attracting the attention of other Cyclops. They ask what's wrong, and he says that nobody is hurting him. They then think he is mad. Again, this shows Odysseus' cunning, the fact that he said nobody rather than his real name. The Cyclops opens up the cave and sits in the doorway to catch them trying to escape. because obviously the reason he opens up the cave is because he needs to let his sheep and ram and goats out, because his one true love are his animals, bless them. And then he runs his hand along each ram as they leave to make sure that they really are rams rather than humans. Odysseus lashes together the rams in 3 for his men, while he takes a full-grown ram. And what they do is they tie themselves underneath the rams. So I've tried to put it on a little image there. They hang underneath so that the Cyclops can feel the top of the rams or the goats and feel the fluff and think, okay, there's no humans there. This is the only way that they can escape. Again, it's quite implausible how they can tie 3 rams together and then hold on underneath, but it makes the story. So the Cyclops won't feel them escaping. The next morning, when the rams leave, the Cyclops doesn't feel the men underneath. The big ram is slow because of Odysseus' weight, but Polyphemus thinks that it pities him. This is very emotive. It almost evokes pathos for the Cyclops, because it shows that his genuine care for his animals they're essentially like his family, and he clearly thinks that the animals care about him, which, well, it's unclear whether they do or don't. They're just animals. They don't really give any feelings here. But this is quite an emotive moment. The men take the sheep and goats, etc., back to their ship, and then begin to sail silently away, until Odysseus shouts back to Polyphemus, taunting him. This is his great pride coming forward, rather than his intellect. Cyclops throws a boulder in the direction of Odysseus' voice. It only just misses the ship, and the wave it causes pushes the ship towards land. They begin to row away again, and the men try to convince Odysseus to keep quiet and not to shout again. However, he does, and tells the Cyclops his real name and lineage, which is obviously a very good idea. Good one, Odysseus. The Cyclops remembers a prophecy about a man called Odysseus who would blind him. He shouts that he is Poseidon's son. He makes a dig. He says that he thought the man would be bigger and more threatening, which is a slight to Odysseus' Kleos. He then raises his hands and curses Odysseus to Poseidon. This curse is the cause of all of Odysseus' troubles in the Odyssey, chronologically. So before this point, he's obviously just been from the Trojan War. He's been successful in battle. He's got lots of wealth. He's got Kleos. And it's after this curse that everything seems to go wrong for him. So yeah, this really was a bad move by Odysseus. The curse says that he may never reach home, and if he is destined to, may it be late, in wretched plight, with no comrades, in a foreign ship, and to find trouble at home. So this kind of foreshadows the main plot of the rest of the Odyssey. Polyphemus then throws another boulder, and it misses once again. Of course, he is throwing boulders blind, so he's just following the sound of their voice. That's why Odysseus shouting was such a big deal, because if he had been silent, the Cyclops wouldn't have been able to hear them, and they'd have got away scot-free. They return to the island and find the rest of the crew, and then they divide up the spoils from Polyphemus' island. They present Odysseus with a big ram, which he sacrifices, and then they feast and sleep and sail away, grieving for the lost men. There is a recurring image of the men crying, and as I said in the book 5 summary, in ancient society this was not necessarily a bad thing. It showed heroism, it evoked pathos, it showed struggle. It was actually what a hero would do. They did have human emotions. Okay, thank you for listening. This was the book 9 summary of the Odyssey. There will be more coming soon.